I'm Jon Atack, and I think, but we may, by the end of this conversation, determine otherwise. And by the end of the conversation, Chris Shelton may be Jon Atack, and Jon Atack may be Chris Shelton. How do we know? And I think this is the day we're going to find out because of what we're going to talk about. So,
indeed. Yeah, today we are tackling, or at least we're starting off the conversation tackling technology, artificial intelligence, the singularity, and where this is all going. This is, by the way, something that is really blowing up in the media right now. It's a very hot topic item because of the release of Chat GPT and Bard and various AI interfaces and advanced search text engine completion machines. There is a thing called Midjourney, which will create art for you. One of, I'm sure, many platforms that you can feed prompts into descriptive phrases, and the computer will generate art based on your.
It will paint a Rembrandt.
Yeah,
it will compose a Mozart symphony.
And if you tell it to, it will do its best to duplicate or take the characteristics it understands. And the very funny thing about all of this is we have to use human terminology to describe processes that are not human organic thinking processes. They are simulated processes, or they are processes that attempt rather to simulate in some ways the way our brains work. And so I thought maybe we might want to start, because this was something I needed to be clear on, and maybe other people do too, as they've heard this term, the singularity. We're approaching the singularity, with a big capital S. And Peter Thiel is obsessed with creating the singularity. What is the singularity? What is this? Well, I looked it up. The technological, I'm just going to read from Wikipedia because it's something everybody can look up. Okay, this isn't the be-all, end-all of this, but this is just a description. The technological singularity is a hypothetical future point in time at which technological growth becomes uncontrollable and irreversible, resulting in unforeseeable changes to human civilization. That's, in a nutshell, that's the singularity.
Yeah, I mean, the idea in its origins, it comes from Silicon Valley, I think, and you know, the Terminator, the movie, does actually deal with potential consequences. And one of the developers of virtual reality, Jaron Lanier, who is a remarkable, brilliant man, became a heretic. And you know, more than a decade ago, started saying these people really believe that the singularity will solve all humanist problems. Right. And it's sort of, it's teleological, you know, that in the future we will have created God and it will do everything. And the Terminator sits at the other end of this idea that it'll go, why bother with these horrid creatures? Let's get rid of them.
Right.
And I introduced the subject because a few weeks ago, I saw Big Bug, Jean-Pierre Jeunet, the brilliant creator of Amélie and Micmac and Delicatessen and so many other wonderful films, that this great film came on Amazon, and I watched it and I was so interested, and this doesn't happen that often, that 3 days later I watched it again. And I thought, this is a really good, and I just suggest that people go and have a look at that, because here you have this very brilliant, eccentric mind, Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who is looking at this problem and offering some reflections upon what might happen to us if we're not a little bit careful. We can add to that there's been a petition recently on future of life. And it says, pause giant AI experiments, an open letter. Yeah. It's been signed by Elon Musk, of all people, but 50,000 people to date have signed it. I'm not one of them. And there's a reason for that. And what they're saying is, let's see if we can put our spectacles on and see what they're saying. You're lucky you've got your specs on already. I had to put them on tape. Yeah, we have this idea that, and let's make a distinction that we've been dealing with artificial intelligence for a long time. And this is when you go on Amazon and buy a coffee maker and it recommends 10 more coffee makers for you.
Right.
You know, that's really artificial as far as intelligence goes. Then we've got the kind of artificial intelligence agency, as I kind of think of it. Things like Facebook, you know, where Facebook, their data was sold to 45,000, I think it is, 40 to 45,000 corporations, harvested 5,000 pieces of information on every adult in the United States, according to Brittany Kaiser, who sold Cambridge Analytica to the Donald Trump campaign in 2015 or whenever, 2016.
Yep.
And so that's, I think of that, as I say, as the artificial intelligence agency, that, you know, your Alexa, your Siri. I wrote a piece called Little Sister is Listening to You years ago and published it, because if you are using Alexa, it is recording everything that happens. And this came to light in an FBI warrant years ago where they said, and I don't remember which of whether it was Siri or Cortana, or, you know, I don't want to slag off the wrong people. It's like, you know, drink the Kool-Aid. It wasn't Kool-Aid, it was Flavor Aid. And that was the best marketing thing that Flavor Aid ever got to. We'll get rid of Kool-Aid. Well, so I don't remember which it was, but a murder had been committed in a room where there was one of these, a member of the artificial intelligence agency was functioning. And they got, you know, I'm glad if the murderer was convicted, that's a good thing. But the idea that we're being watched all the time, being recorded, that's within AI. What we're now headed towards is artificial general intelligence.
Right, AGI. That's right. That's the big goal concept that is being discussed so much now in the media, is the differences between the level that you're talking about and this more generalized, independent, creative decision-making machine intelligence, I guess you could describe it as. Where it kind of, the idea is that you wouldn't really be able to tell any difference between that and you and me.
And yeah, absolutely, that it would pass the so-called Turing test, that in talking with it, you wouldn't know that you were talking to a machine. And in fact, machines have already, you know, for me, the Rubicon was crossed when a computer was first able to beat a world champion at the game of Go.
Right.
You know, when Deep Blue beat Kasparov. Yeah, chess is, you know, it's a restricted game with a limited number of moves. Go, although a very simple game to play, I've played it since I was 17, is infinitely complex. And so when it was like, oh my God, we've got to a level of processing now. So the idea with this petition, and we'll put, you know, in the comments, in the description, we'll put a link to it if you want to sign it. Future of Life is that we must stop doing these experiments. GPT-4 is the new generation that was released a week or two back. And it says, should we let machines flood our information channels with propaganda and untruth? Should we automate away all the jobs, including the fulfilling ones? Should we develop non-human minds that might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete? That's not really a good use grammatically of the word obsolete, and replace us. I say that as a proofreader. They quote this idea, at some point it may be important to get independent review before starting to train future systems, and for the most advanced efforts to agree to limit the rate of growth of compute, it says, in fact, used for creating new models. And they say the point is now. The reason I'm not signing this petition is because if in the West we stop developing artificial general intelligence, the Chinese won't.
True.
And so from a military point of view, and I hate to say this as a pacifist, but the kind of pacifist that if you threaten me, I'll punch you. You know, I'm not going to roll over and lie down. But at the moment, China is an incredible threat militarily. They have developed weapon systems that the US doesn't have. And they have now got bases because of the Belt and Road program, which I think is in over 130 countries now, leaving only 60 or 70 where it doesn't exist. But in places like Sri Lanka, where they lent money to build an airport and docks, and when the interest payments were defaulted on, they took control of those, which means they potentially have military bases wherever they've done this. I don't want to be a scaremonger. I love the Chinese people, but I have a real problem with the Chinese government.
Yeah, exactly.
Particularly Xi. China is a fascist country. It is not a democracy. You can't have a single party democracy. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so, but the unbridled release of this is another matter altogether. I think, I've got so much here, so many bits and pieces. I don't want to, as you've put it before, gish galloping and just.
You're not gish galloping. That's a debate thing, Jon, and you don't do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, not at all. I've got a lot of different ideas about this, but my basic like problem with the way that this is being approached is I don't have a problem with the forward advance of technology. I've been watching it happen my entire life. During my lifetime, we've gone from punch cards and floppy disks that were 9 inches wide to being able to put the collected works of the Library of Congress on a thumb drive. I mean, we've really come a long way in a few decades of my existence. And during that time, I've not been afraid of technology or the march of progress of technology. What I have watched, and we, both of us, I think, are psych guys. We pay attention to the psychology of things and the inner workings of a thing. And what we see, and I'm speaking for myself, is what I certainly see is the fatal flaw in the system is us. And not because we're puny, insignificant things. We're the ones creating all of this. So clearly we're not puny and insignificant in this equation. What is difficult about human nature and about the human march of technology is the historical context of it is that we always get our eye on a prize and we rush headlong in competitive spirit to get that prize, and we don't ever stop and think until after the fact of having it, what are the unintended consequences of this technological advancement? And we can walk this all the way back to the longbow and the crossbow and the use of gunpowder for guns or for projectiles. We can, to the the development of the atomic weapons is the most modern cautionary tale, but all of this is a cautionary tale in history. And that's us. That's our psychology. That's our ego. That is our social hierarchy and status and trying to climb the status ladder. And that is trying, honestly, to build the better mousetrap, to build the better thing, to make, the idea, the sort of pacifistic, maybe after the fact, I don't really know, but the pacifistic approach to building the atomic weapons or to building the crossbow or the gun was make war, dynamite, right? Make war too terrible to be fought and it won't be fought. Well, that didn't pan out at all. Because not all human beings are on the same pacifistic page, nor are they even on the same cognitive level. You take madmen, authoritarians, these are not bright guys all the time. and yet they can rise to incredible positions of incredible power and influence. And then they take the technology that comes out of this, you know, all the best intentions, all the most altruistic dreams, and they turn it into something awful, because that's a capability that human beings have. So it's not. So now we're in a place where we have a debate, a talk about, well, this is a developing technology. All of us, there's not a single intelligent human being I've yet run across who doesn't have some degree of trepidation about this topic. They're like, oh man, this could be fraught with an awful lot of peril. There could be real bad consequences here. And then we have the Peter Thiels of the world, right? The venture capitalists, the Silicon Valley magnates, and all of their developers. Mm-hmm. And they don't think about any of this. They just march forward. And that's that cycle. I don't see any reason why this is any different from any of those earlier times. Why can we not ever learn the lessons? That's what I'm most concerned about with this. Is, sure, it's inevitable. We're going to keep moving forward, fine. But why can't we ever stop and think, wait a second, maybe we should think about what we're developing and what are all the unintended consequences of where this could go? And that's where Jaron, am I saying his name right? Because I've only seen it in writing. Really smart guy. I really like his work. And for years, he's been decrying this. He's been saying, look, the internet has all this amazing potential, and social media just turned it all upside down. It's not the internet that's the problem. It's that. And these other gurus and other people who aren't thinking the thought through. And it seems to be a very core element of his arguments is, why are we not thinking all of this through? What are we doing? You know? So that's kind of my general approach or attitude about it, just to kind of lead with that. And yeah, what and where are you coming from on it?
Well, I think there's a profound degree of magical thinking. You know, the idea that once we hand over to this superior intelligence, it will be nice to us.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I'm not sure that, I mean, there's so much in what you said. I mean, I can't help it. The Longbow and the battles of Crécy and Agincourt, in which my compatriots at the time defeated the French and took over the kingship of that country, which still rightfully belongs to our monarch. I think you'd probably agree if you studied. You know, so when Henry V, and gave us a couple of great plays from Shakespeare. But in fact, this gesture, which is considered particularly obscene in my country and is taken to mean F off.
Oh, holding two fingers up in a
holding
V,
two fingers up to
in a
somebody.
V-like symbol, yeah.
It's like the American spin on it,
right?
Flipping the bird. But it's actually the English archers to the French going, I've still got my fingers, because what the French would do is cut off the bow fingers of the right hand whenever they captured an English archer before. So, you know, it doesn't mean what people think. It's actually a polite gesture to say, I can still fire my bow. And with some kinds of, you know, talking about the atomic bomb, Oppenheimer, of course, directed the Manhattan Project, very seriously changed his mind about what he'd done. And after Hiroshima, there's the famous I am become death.
That's right.
Statement.
Destroyer of worlds, right?
Destroyer of worlds.
Yeah.
Quoted from, is it the Bhagavad Gita, from the Mahabharata, from Hindu scripture. And he then campaigned against nuclear proliferation, which then happened in this weird way that the space race was kind of the polite end, and nuclear arms, you know, and they're massive. I mean, there have been 1,800 nuclear tests. You're going, why do they have to keep testing this thing? You know,
right?
So, and it's, of course, and once they'd found out about fallout, I mean, tourists used to go to Las Vegas, put little goggles on so they could watch the tests. You know, so you're all being, radiation sickness, here we go. And I think it's true that everyone alive now probably has a little particle of uranium in their body as a consequence of this, which probably it may be good, it may be bad. The dosage is important. And you then get a particular development with the development of nitrate fertilizers, which tremendously, it fed a lot more people being able to use nitrates for this purpose. But it was also the gases used in World War One come from the same guy and the same process. So sometimes, it's been put to me that there's always a good and a bad end of every process. I don't think that's true. I think that's just an overly simple heuristic.
Yeah.
That you can use a club for hammering nails in, I suppose, as well as for hitting people over the head. But a hammer's much better. Then you have a use of technology like the one that was exposed by Edward Snowden, where your cell phone, or in this country, mobile phone, can be switched on by an intelligence agency and used as a microphone to listen to you. And that's a little bit of a scary thought. And when it was pointed out that, in fact, Angela Merkel's phone, the premier of Germany, was being monitored by US intelligence agencies, Barack Obama made a joke about it, about looking after his friends. I don't want to be looked after in that way, really, with people eavesdropping on my conversations. And oh dear, they've been eavesdropping on our conversations since the 80s, when the Echelon system was set up here in the UK to monitor all landline phone calls with trigger words. And you start going, and again, artificial intelligence agency, that there are these groups of people who have not really developed adult values. They've not really seen that we either hang together or we hang alone, as Benjamin Franklin said. So I looked at this last week. New Scientist actually had a piece about GPT-4, which was packed with goodies, because it's got Microsoft themselves are talking about it. They believe, and this is a quote from a Microsoft statement, given the breadth and depth of GPT-4's capabilities, we believe that it could reasonably be viewed as an early yet still incomplete version of an artificial general intelligence system. And we all saw probably saw the Chat GPT, its predecessor, which was only last month, getting into a fight with somebody over about what year it was, and telling them it's 2022, and I'm going to come around and beat you up if you keep, and you should apologize to me, you human puny creature. So we get into this thing where we're dealing with consciousness. And what is it we're looking towards? I haven't read it yet. I'm on my way into it, but I'm a big fan of the Cambridge psychologist Nicholas Humphrey. He wrote a book called Seeing Red in 2006, which was wonderful, which introduced me to this thing called the hard problem of consciousness. What is consciousness? What do we mean by it? And philosophers of mind have been going round and round for decades trying to work this out. And he says, I don't believe there's any necessary connection between intelligence and sentience. And he then goes on, Daniel Hillis has suggested that the World Wide Web has already become conscious, simply as a consequence of its complexity. Only it hasn't deigned to tell us yet. Could the World Wide Web be hurting? Do we have a duty of care towards it?
Well, there's an interesting
the movie
series
Big Bug does get into.
Yeah, it's a little interesting series of unfalsifiable claims there, but okay.
But
I've
has it already happened?
I've seriously, and not joking aside, I have seriously considered or wondered whether we might consider Earth's entire ecosystem as a form of higher consciousness, and that's not original thinking to me.
Gaia.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly, right? Could it be that we could consider, or model or think about the entire all of life, the entire system, and all of the, even if we threw in, natural processes that the planet itself engages in, could we consider that a kind of consciousness or a kind of life in and of itself that we are only a tiny part of, or a significant, maybe oversized influence on, but size-wise and all that, right? So I can allow myself to go into those kind of flights of imagination or wonderment. I think that it's very important, and I see, and you've addressed this already to a degree, where whole books or whole papers get written on these topics of consciousness and the problem of hard consciousness, and it's like, okay, so we can develop, there's this concept of, well, there could be something that is sentient, and then there's the word intelligence. These are troublesome words when you actually start trying to break down what they really mean. What do you mean by intelligence versus sentience versus consciousness? And where does ethics come into this equation too? Because if you start considering life, consciousness is something we connect with life, not inanimate objects. So if you're talking about building an artificial consciousness, does that include the concept of morality as part of it, or are we talking about simply a problem-solving matrix that does not, it receives inputs and gives outputs? Is that what we mean by intelligence? Is that what we mean by this artificial consciousness? What exactly are we saying? And this is something where there's an awful lot of disagreement, wildly different opinions and ideas. And to my chagrin, maybe chagrin's not the right word, to my horror, I talk to developers directly about this kind of thing. I bring this up. And to a T, every single one of them so far has told me that it has nothing to do with them. It's way above their pay grade. And they're just developing algorithms and working for the companies because they got their bills to pay. And it's just What's that?
At Nuremberg, when SS men said Befehl ist Befehl, orders are orders, it was determined that if you follow an immoral order, you are guilty of a crime. And that puts us in an incredible situation, so that in the US, where you are in Colorado, for example, it's perfectly legal to use cannabis. In this country, even if somebody, and it's now a few years ago, finally Parliament accepted that there are medicinal uses of cannabis. Our Act of Parliament in 1971 said there are none. Right. And that's that, because we're judges and we know. Well, so you get this thing. It's like somebody is in this country, say, taking cannabis because they have breast cancer. And, there are a number of people have stepped forward and said, it put me into remission. It's incredible. And there's no medical research because it's against the law. And you start getting into these moralistic problems, which is like, well, okay, so if a police officer busts somebody who has breast cancer and is using, they're busted for using cannabis, and such things were happening in the US and have happened, then is the police officer guilty of a crime under the Nuremberg law? And is a developer who's saying, well, I helped to build the atomic bomb, and maybe it is true that bombing one of the hundreds of uninhabited Japanese islands would have been a good way of showing it. And maybe it's also true that Harry S. Truman, and the S stands for S in his name, I'm told, because his parents thought it would be good if he had an S in the middle of it. Harry S. Truman, in his cabinet minutes, in the decision to drop the atomic bomb, actually said we have to show the Russians what we have, because the Russians were moving 1.5 million troops into Manchuria, and which was another reason why the Japanese surrendered. But we have to show the Russians what we've got. That didn't work out. Korea still happened, one of the worst conflicts in history, which is almost written out of the history books, there was not a single town still standing in North Korea after that war. Not one. It was bombed flat. And people are wondering why the North Koreans are a little untrusting of everybody but Donald Trump for some reason. We have got ourselves into this, exactly as you say, not understanding the consequences, which is why, here's this petition to say, let's stop doing this. But the problem is we can't stop the other guy from doing it.
That's right.
So putting some laws there, putting some restraint there, yes, there should be a moratorium and some very quick working, but none of our governments have, privacy issues on the internet. In the US, you've got virtually no protection. We still have the European laws until our government gets rid of them all, and gives us liberty, from laws and things like that. The part of it that concerns me, when I am opposed to communism, I think it's a silly idea. I'm opposed to socialism. It's lovely, but while human beings are still unenlightened, it's not going to work. The thug culture will do something. But I'm also opposed to capitalism. The idea that there should be some small number of predatory people who in a democracy have thousands of times more power than you and I, because they can bribe politicians with donations. I'm just appalled. But one of the central doctrines of capitalism, which people don't seem to grasp, is the invisible hand. There's an invisible hand. And as long as you let people trade freely, which none of the Western countries do, we all have sanctions, we all have tariffs, we all have subsidies. In this country, the production of white sugar is supported by the state. And at the same time, we're talking about taxing it so people won't use it. And you're going, what happened to the invisible hand of capitalism? It's obviously become invisible. And with the singularity, there's this invisible hand notion. If I just close my eyes and pray, everything will be fine. If I just pull the blankets over my head, then the monster will go away. And I think this is because humanity in general is childish. People, the development of morality, for me, that consciousness, what's important is the realization there are others. It's not just theory of mind that I know they're thinking too, but that for me to achieve satisfaction in life, there are two things. One is I like the pleasures of life. I do like chocolate. I admit it. I don't like sugar. So I eat 85% chocolate, and it's fantastic, And it's also very good for you. It's very healthy food, chocolate. It's the sugar that's not healthy. But so the little pleasures, that keep us going, the little Phillips that perk our day up, that's fantastic. We need that. But if you point yourself at that thrill-seeking, you will become debauched. You will pretty soon find that the pleasures don't work anymore. And
well, that's right. We become oversaturated, oversated with things. And we've all felt or experienced that when we let ourselves go, and then we're sick to our stomach, or we're spent, or we're otherwise, had too much sensation, too much overload. And we've seen and we've seen experiments with monkeys and baboons and whatnot, where you give them just way too much of this stuff, and eventually they just collapse.
Yeah, and curiously, with monkeys, that there were some monkey watchers realized there were three types of monkey in this particular pack. There were ones that, when they could get the beer from the tourists, would just fall over. There were the ones that took the beer in moderation, and the ones that decided the beer wasn't good for them. So even among monkeys, there is some level of appreciation. I believe, however, that our happiness depends upon what we can do for other people. I don't believe in sacrificing ourselves to others' needs, so I fear that I have rather done that in my life.
Yeah.
And anybody wants to contribute to Patreon. I don't have a pension beyond my state pension, which absolutely does not cover my outgoings. But I do feel happy. I do feel that my life has been well spent, even though I'd rather have been painting pictures and writing novels, and I've done a fair amount of that too. But let's be unpleasant about it. The 600 or so people that I've dealt with directly in their recovery from Scientology all went away and lived their lives, and they didn't help me. They didn't contribute anything financially to me. I think I've only ever charged money from three rich people who were Scientologists and wanted to talk to me. And this is in a 40-year period. But my smugness exceeds all, because I look at the life I've led and I don't regret. The Black Rogers drum kit, I should have had that, but that's okay because they've got a Roland TD-50X now, and that's much better. Fantastic. But I really don't regret anything. I really feel that it was the right thing to do my best to help people, and that virtue is its own punishment. But I think that's what I discovered, that my satisfaction is partly the pleasure I take in the day, but partly looking at how can we do something useful for people, not convert them to our beliefs, not be missionaries and force them to give up, their, what happened in Tahiti, say, and so many other places where they had something close to paradise there, and then syphilis was introduced by the French. And I think the development of conscience is an essential here. That there is a real problem that if you try and develop a logic engine, something will do the most logical thing. This, the mythology of the split brain, that because of Gazzaniga's work in cutting the corpus callosum in grand mal epileptics to stop them from having fits. And this perverse idea, which I believed for a while because it was so popular, that there are two people in here. There is, the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body and vice versa, and that one side of the brain is calculating and analytical and without emotion, and the other side is the soft, nice, lovely side. And the point is that you'll only find that kind of thing if you split the corpus callosum. Otherwise, we are integrated systems, and it's all functioning together. Some people are phlegmatic. They don't seem to have much in the way of emotional reaction. There are only a tiny amount of them. One set of people are fearless and will, they really don't care about inflicting pain on others. And we call them psychopaths. And they're quite dangerous, but I don't think they are the cause of evil. They are the cause of some evil. But I think that it is people who have swallowed the authoritarian mindset, which is either believing they are God's gift and that whatever they have to say is the right thing, with or without evidence. I mean, it's watching Boris Johnson, the parliamentary hearing about whether he'd lied deliberately to Parliament about having parties during lockdown. And he starts trying to tear a strip off the head of the committee rather than responding. It's said that when he was at Eton, the headmaster, in fact, the letter's been read out, so it did happen. The headmaster wrote a letter saying that he'd been brought in to be reprimanded for something he'd done wrong. And he was just going, no, why am I not head boy? Why am I not head boy? So people like him, people who believe that they are entitled to be in charge because they believe they have a superior intelligence, and they don't. They really don't. So that's the one type of person. And the other is the people who believe them. And that, as we've talked about this before, about 60% of the population.
Yeah.
Just like, well, I don't know, my opinion's not valid. I'll do what Himmler said, or whoever their guru is. The development of personal conscience, growing up to be an adult, developing a self, means that we have to be making moral decisions. And that's been abrogated in the technical field. That, as you say, it's not a problem of technological development, it's a problem of what it's going to be used for. And the cynicism, I'm protecting my country, therefore. So, the MK Ultra experiments, where one of them was having prostitutes give LSD to their clients and watching them. And the guy who ran the experiment had a two-way mirror so he could sit and watch this happening. But he decided he didn't want to miss a minute of it. So he actually sat on a commode watching this. And then, as far as I'm concerned, if you want, to have one little metaphor for what is happening in our society, it's the government giving us acid so it can look through a two-way mirror while shitting. That we just seem to be, what the hell are these people doing? And I don't care whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Tories, whatever. Where is the morality? And is it possible? Because if it's not possible to have moral politicians, you can forget about having moral AI.
Well, exactly. And I think you're nailing the exact crux of the problem. I mentioned a few minutes ago how I have interacted with developers who write these systems, who talk about this stuff or follow it avidly and are very big proponents of it. They want this singularity. They want this thing to happen as quickly as possible. And you try to introduce these concepts to them and they look at you. It is the weirdest feeling because they will look at you and they're, it's almost like this little head tilt happens and they look at you and go, why is that important?
Yeah.
I don't understand why you're even bringing that up. Or you get the other response. We've talked about the magical thinking where it's like, oh no, that'll just sort itself out. That'll just sort itself out. That's not something we have to worry about. Consciousness and ethics and morals and decision making. No. That'll just sort itself out. It's so whistling past the graveyard, for lack of a better term to come to mind right now. I'm shocked and appalled when you face it head on like this, when you bring up what I consider to be intelligent questions about the very core principles that you're designing, and they blow you off and say it'll either take care of itself or it's just not important. We don't have to understand those things. They're not part of this equation. You're almost left dumbfounded. You're just, how can you be so fucking stupid? How can you, who are so smart, you spend years going to school, you spend years digging into the intricacies of bits and bytes and modeling and neural networks, and you're a moron. You're an ethical moron. And the reason I say things like this is because these people can't even define what ethics are. And they're trying to build systems that we are very concerned about the ethical framework in which these systems will be making decisions. How do you program in ethics? Because ethics is a byproduct of an organic process of social hierarchies and emotional responses and the need for social interaction. Computers don't have those things, and they never will unless we program them in. And we already see in Chat GPT 4, the latest and greatest, such overt bias already being programmed into these machines. You can tell a joke about a guy, about a white male. You cannot tell a joke about a black female.
Or even a white female.
Or any female, yeah. It won't let you. It literally won't let you. Why? Because somebody made that decision for it that it can't. And you have to trick it. You got to walk around it and work around it. And what do human beings do? We constantly push at every single weak point in these systems. Some people out of malice, but most people out of just dumbassery. I just want to see if I can do it. I just want to see what happens. I just want to see. And this kind of thinking that human beings engage in is the exact problem that none of these coders or venture capitalists acknowledge as a real problem. They just don't want to acknowledge any part of any of that. And yet you're talking about building systems that are amongst the most influential and powerful things that has ever been presented to humanity. You thought the crossbow was bad. These things are literally in the home of every single person who goes online, anywhere and starts talking to it, whether we're talking about the AI art or the AI answering things or the search engines or any of this stuff. So you want to talk about taking this to the next level, and it's like, well, what is the next level? Well, we don't know, but it'll sort itself out.
And I think actually your earlier analogy of the longbow becomes very relevant. That the reason that Longbow was so deadly, I mean, it killed off a third of the nobility of France at Agincourt. You know, it's the same level of slaughter as the First World War, but it happened in a couple of days, not 4 years, because there was an agreement, and the English had broken it. And the agreement was, your knights are captured and ransomed. You don't kill knights in battle. And the great sport is, you know, blipping the peasants on the head and getting rid of them. They don't matter. And what had happened was a bunch of peasants, given these longbows, could actually kill the knights before they could get anywhere near them. And that broke the rules.
Yep.
Now, I think that we're at a place where the level of rule setting is like those French knights, that people believe, well, everybody will be nice with it. And we're watching Russia and Ukraine. We're watching China developing its power. And again, I've got nothing against the Russian people. I talked with a friend in Russia a couple of months ago, and I'm really sorry, and he's really sorry. And I have to be very careful about what I get him to say. You know, I'm not going to ask him any questions about this because I know how he feels. He's a Christian. He thinks war is wrong, you know, and that's that. But if he says so on, you know, he can join the 20 or 30,000 people who've now been sent to prison in Russia for expressing the opinion that it is a war.
Exactly.
And so, you know, where this goes in the future, I can only see that by people becoming individually responsible, by people complaining about the things that are wrong, voting in politicians who will actually aim at us not destroying all life on Earth, that it becomes a personal responsibility. It becomes, how do I behave? Do I leave my lights on and then complain about, you know, somebody being ecologically unfriendly? Do I overuse energy? And of course, that will shift. There could come a point where we can actually get the photosynthetic process and use it. And once we've done that, then the amount of energy we use won't matter anymore, you know, because we won't be reliant on wind turbines and solar and what have you. If we were smart enough to do photosynthesis, like just about any plant can, and you don't have to be smart for that, I guess. The differentiation that Nicholas Humphrey makes in the book Sentience is between cognitive consciousness and phenomenal consciousness. And he's basically, what he would call intelligence is cognitive consciousness. You know, the machine can be aware of all the things in the environment, but it does not have phenomenal consciousness, differentiating the qualities of sweetness, of redness, the qualia, the things that happen in the mind. And we're getting to a point where if we are to get to artificial general intelligence, machines are going to have to some extent, discern qualia, which is where the movie Big Bug becomes very relevant.
Right.
You know, Genet has understood this problem, and he has machines that want to be loved, you know, and they want to be human. You know, they want to engage. And I'm not going to spoil it because I think the ending is really quite beautiful when you come to it. But this sense of building a machine that is going to have phenomenal consciousness, which would put us to artificial general intelligence. And the difference is, I mean, Edward Johns at Imperial College London has said that GPT-4 is simply mimicking what humans have done in the past. I don't think he's understood what's happening here. This is not like a neural network, you know, which have been with us since the 80s, and you know, had some involvement. I was aware of the development of them because my business partner was working for Philips, who were developing them, and so we saw fuzzy logic. You know, a washing machine can measure the weight, the temperature, the viscosity of the water, and then determine how long to be on for, which is great. A neural network can look at how many people are on a railway station at a particular time and work out things about how to, maximize traffic flow, and things like that. This is all great. We are now coming to the point, and it is made here, that AI is prone to hallucination. And so you have this thing where nobody understands, because this isn't like doing a Google search. It's not just scanning all the information and offering it to you based upon who's got their search engine optimization working the best or paid the most money to Google or whoever. But it's now actually weaving things together from what it's been told and synthesizing information, and it can make things up. It can absolutely make information up just as badly as QAnon.
Yes. It can synthesize information in what we might describe or perceive or interpret as creative ways. It's not showing initiative as we would think of life having initiative, but its ability to synthesize so many different data points can simulate that in ways that make it almost indistinguishable in certain contexts, I guess is how it works. Yeah.
And we're dealing, in fact, with almost an equivalent of an autistic savant, where, you can have phenomenal, Kim Peek is the best read human being in the world. You're into the tens of thousands of books that Kim Peek has read, one of the inspirations to the Rain Man, of course. And he can remember accurately 98% of what he's read. And he reads the left page with the left eye and the right page with the right. And you can watch him just turning. And yet, tying his shoelaces or feeding himself, no. And so I think that we've come to a place where, so I love the idea that there is no self, that the self is the 200 brain regions interacting to make this thing. And I wrote a little bit about that in Opening Our Minds, that you're dealing with something that's so magnificently three-dimensional that somehow functions in real time. I don't have to think particularly about what I'm going to say. And many people would say, I don't think about what I say. It just pours forth for all of us. And that to me is just the most, miraculous process that somehow this thing is doing this. But then you have the sense of certainty, this thing that, William James, founding father of psychology, and a founder of the American and British Societies for Psychical Research, also interesting point. But nonetheless, that he puts forward this idea of noesis, this idea that we have feelings of knowing. You saw me at Toronto give the same example I always give. Bible basher tells me, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. Right. What do we mean by knowledge at this point?
Right.
I don't understand it, but I know it. I can't get with that. But it's how we all behave. That feels right to me. I will have cognitive dissonance if somebody suggests that my belief in, the radishes in my garden having magical powers is wrong, because I know they do. I know they're watching me. That this kind of madness that we experience in dreams. I mean, I'm very interested at the moment, the Ganzfeld effect, which we've talked about before, where sensory deprivation means that you start getting feedback signals. So if you sit and stare at something, meditation, mindfulness, training routine 0, then you'll start to hallucinate if you have a functioning brain. If you don't hallucinate while you're doing that, there's probably something wrong. But what's happening inside the brain is that rather than having the alpha and beta or beta, depending American or English, waves, alpha or beta waves going on, you've got theta or theta waves going on. You've got a dream state while you're awake if you stare at stuff. If you sit in a dark room or go in a sensory deprivation chamber. So in fact, your credulity level changes. You know, people say you're more suggestible. That's one way of saying it.
That's right.
But you'll believe anything. You know, whatever is put to you as the reality of how you were gifted this blissful, euphoric state of sitting still, which you really could have done on your own without a guru. Well, now the guru is, oh yeah, you know, you gave me this wonderful magical state. And seeing that we can therefore hallucinate in real time, we can make the world up around us. And of course, we live in our representation of the world, as I'm told Immanuel Kant said.
Exactly.
And that means everything is interpreted. If somebody, you know, was upset by somebody else talking about fossil fuels and they don't like the word fossil and you call them an old fossil or something. No, if somebody, that word triggers them, how are you to know that? How are you to know, you know, there are some words and like funeral and death, which tend to trigger reactions in normal human beings. But, you know, a friend who walked in, I was playing a Joni Mitchell album. This is like 50 years ago or something, 40 years ago. And he said, oh, take that off. Please take that off. And I'm like, why? It's pretty, you know, it's nice. He said, oh, I had a bad trip when I was listening to Joni Mitchell album. I said, was it this album? He said, no, but anything Joni Mitchell now. And you're like, what an interesting piece of self-conditioning you've got into. I can't listen to that because it upsets me, because it reminds me of this thing when I got upset. Right. I think it'd be a good idea to deal with that. And I'd start probably with Wild Things Run Fast or Travelogue by Joni Mitchell to get over that. But, you know, one of the great songwriters in all history, no two ways about it. We condition ourselves to respond, and then our feelings of knowing, our sense of certainty takes over. And what happens when machines start getting a sense of certainty? Because Chat GPT, the last iteration, certainly seemed to be capable of doing that.
Well, that's exactly, that brings up, or is another sort of way of approaching the problem I'm seeing with this is there's knowledge, there's a piece of there's a fact, there's a piece of information, and a computer to a computer it's ones and zeros, right? To us it's some thing you read, something you see, some observable experience, right? You've input this knowledge, and it's a fact. It's not necessarily something you're emotionally invested in. It's simply a fact, right? This board is black or a shade of gray. It's clearly that way. I can perceive it that way, so my brain goes, "Yep, that's the fact of the situation." Well, how do you feel about that? Oh, well, I don't particularly feel any way about this. Oh, okay, fine. Here's a bunch of facts on cards about critical thinking. Oh, well, how do you feel about those? Oh, I feel very strongly about those. Oh, why? Because of what they're associated with. They're associated with all these other things. And all these other things, to the human brain and the human experience, all of these things can have what we intangibly and sort of fluidly call value. They're graded based on what? Our experience, our education, our social standing, our ego. Lots of things contribute to what is the value of this thing in various contexts. Even this will have value in this context. It'll have different value in this other context. Every single human being can be said to assign values to facts or to ideas or to interpretations of reality. But what value they're going to assign to all of those different things, I guarantee you, is going to be as unique as our fingerprints from one person to another, to another, to another. And this is where we see this incredible multiplicity of human, the variety of human reactions to things. Computers, you give them a set of instructions, 100% of the time they're going to operate they'll give you the exact output, right? Until we started coming up with, more recently, black box design, where here comes an input, we don't know what the hell the computer's doing with it, out comes the output. And the I have to say, the idiocy surrounding this black box design concept, this is a debated, argued point in computer science. And I don't know that a single psychologist has ever weighed in on this stuff, or that they even bother to ask, because it's so obviously clear that if you don't understand the process by which that machine is coming up with its output, how can you ever fact check it reliably? How can you ever understand how to use that black box to integrate with other black boxes and have any conception whatsoever of having control or predictability over what the outcomes are going to be? You're going to have as little ability to predict the outcomes of a system you put together like that as you will to being able to predict the outcomes of a random assortment of people who you ask questions to. That's what we call surveying. We do it all the time. Why? Because we're so wildly unpredictable that you never know what you're going to get. And the time and the place, the context, the events surrounding your surveys are going to have everything to do with informing the results of that survey. A survey you do in 1850, that same survey in 1950, that same survey in 2050, going to be completely different results based on who you're asking and when and why. You're going to get that same kind of variety using a bunch of these black box concepts or mechanisms, and you're not going to understand or be able to predict any of it. And you think this is the way to go about designing systems that are going to control and influence the lives of every person on the planet? Are you out of your mind? And this is the race with which we are, this is the people with which we are competing, where we're talking about here, where we're like, what are these guys doing? It's irresponsibility to a level that is almost impossible to comprehend, because it's so willfully ignorant of what it's doing. I'm shocked that this is even like that. This is such a actually, I shouldn't say I'm so shocked. I'm just so disappointed that this is where the public discourse is at. If you go as deep as you can get into it, it's, well, I don't think it's going to be that bad. I don't really see the problem here. And this is kind of the level of discourse on this is depends on who says it. Oh, this is the CEO of the Chat GPT company. He must know what he's talking about. And you listen to these people, and they're talking like how we're describing. They are completely whistling past every problem that exists that they kind of, sort of, maybe kind of acknowledge could possibly be a problem. But, it'll sort itself out. What's the problem? No big deal.
Absolutely, the authoritarian mindset.
Yeah.
And one of the expressions that I remember from the days of the development of computers in the 70s was GIGO. Garbage in, garbage out. And if you don't know what's going in and you don't know how it's being processed, and this brings us to Boole and Boolean logic, this idea in philosophy initially that you can create a logical way which is mathematical of solving all problems. Now, it proved to be useless in determining human problems, and it's the basis of computing.
Exactly. And it's almost religion and science in terms of the apples and oranges of it. And somehow these guys have the idea that we're gonna use. Here's actually one of my most philosophical problems with this, and this comes maybe out of my own ignorance of the deepest levels of philosophy and computer science and AI. So I'm willing to be wrong about this, but what I see is that there is this the best model we've got. And what we're trying to seem to replicate is this whole process, the brain, the most complex mechanism that we're aware of in the entire universe. Nothing else even comes close. The number of neurons up here, it's unimaginable. You really can't grok like just how complicated this device is that every single one of us are carrying around with us in our heads. It's awe-inspiring.
There are more processors active in the human brain than there are atoms in the universe. That's one of the things that's often said.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
We don't have ones and zeros. Any neuron can have 200 connections, and it's not a simple off or on. It can be a chemical stimulation, potassium, iodine. There are various simple, or it can be a neurochemical stimulation, serotonin, dopamine, these things that people have made ridiculous assertions about for many years. Very happy to see serotonin, melatonin, and oxytocin all falling to meta-analysis in the last year, that we don't know what they're doing. We thought they were doing this, but in fact, the infinity of connection is so great that, in a machine. And of course, new systems, it started with squid systems in the 80s, the idea of bacterial computing, which is quietly going ahead so that you don't have to rely simply on ones and zeros, and you can get into a more complicated form. But you're still, all you're doing is speeding the process up. So,
right.
In the 2-hour exam, is one in here that's that GPT-4 was able to do. What was the exam it took? GPT-4 scored around 80% on the multiple choice components of the US medical licensing exam and 70% on the multi-state bar exam. When taking a software engineering test job, which is given to job candidates at Amazon, it scored 100% using less than 4 minutes of the allotted 2 hours. So you'll speed the process up, but you won't necessarily end up with a Da Vinci. You won't necessarily end up with, and let's say something about Da Vinci here, which there are so many things to be said. He only left 13 paintings. His contemporary Titian left 1,100. So he was a lazy bugger. Most of what he did ended up being used as military stuff, even though he was a pacifist vegetarian. But one of the things he had that separated him out, there are drawings he made of water, and it's falling in chunks. And it was only by the 1980s that cameras became fast enough to show that he was accurate. So occasionally you get a human being who has, and all cultures have seen such people. The Indian and Chinese cultures have also had their Da Vincis. But occasionally you get a human being whose brain is functioning in this way. They won't necessarily be able to fit in with society. I mean, he does seem to have been a little bit Asperger's. And unlike Michelangelo, he was caught for being gay, and he went on trial for it and managed to get away because of patronage, thank God. But nonetheless, the idea is that these machines are going to be Da Vinci's. They're going to be able to solve problems that are beyond our ken, beyond our perception. And the problem is that, what happens when what you get is a dark Da Vinci? What happens when with the Terminator problem, when the machine goes, well, the thing that's screwing everything up is human beings. Let's get rid of them.
And it's not necessarily a solution that is so difficult to understand, considering that all of us have had our nihilistic moments. All of us have had our moments of despair and even suicidal ideation where we're like, look, it really is the best solution to just stop solving problems, to just stop everything.
Let me just insert a little point there for any of our viewers who are feeling suicidal, and as I was under a severe attack and pressure for many years, suicidal ideation was something I lived with for years. That, I'm being sued, I'm being harassed, I'm being followed, my friends are being turned against me, and doing horrible things to me. What is the point? That people I help have no concern for my well-being. What is the point? And luckily, quite early on in this, I read what Buckminster Fuller had to say. They wanted to get a Da Vinci of his time.
Yes.
The geodesic dome and what proved to be the structure of the buckyball, carbon-60. the third form of carbon, which is so important in the modern world. But Mr. Fuller, if I've remembered rightly, and Spike is there to correct me if I don't, thankfully, his wife and child died. And so he was a young man, and he decided to kill himself. And he came to a resolve, which always saved me, which is the only noble way to kill yourself is to go on living and to do the best you can for humanity.
Yeah.
And all of his great work came after that decision that his suicide would be by living the whole of his life as fully as possible. Now, as a much older man with no suicidal ideation, no scrap of it left, and a very happy marriage, and pretty much getting on with life. I've got enough to eat, and I live in a nice house, and I really enjoy my life, having come away from all of that. And it seems a result of that. It seems a consequence of going, just hold on, keep on going, and put things as right as you can. Look after your health. Don't do anything to harm yourself, including thinking nasty things about yourself. Don't be unrealistic in that. Accept criticism and think about it, but don't become dejected just because some troll is in a flame war with you or what have you, which you and I have had to suffer rather too frequently, I fear. When you feel that way, just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again. So that's just a little note for anybody who's watching this. We live with pain and we live with distress. But as Schopenhauer said, having proven philosophically that life is a waste of time, I am now going to tell you how to be happy. And he wrote this little book about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And his solution, quite simply, and you don't need, it's a short book, and the only one by Schopenhauer that I've read, because the rest are just like turgid, brilliant though he was. The advice is the life of the mind. Use Stephen Hawking as the example of a successful human being, somebody who can just twitch one muscle, but was not unhappy, because he lived in his mind and made incredible contributions to humanity. The first theoretical proof of the Big Bang while he was still a student. What happens if two black holes collide? Can energy come out? Incredible. There's a documentary, I think it's called The Theory of Me, which Spike will doubtless find, and it's such a positive, remarkable thing. Him talking about who he is and how he lives, and you get into just how incredibly difficult it was. That this man who demanded that his graduate students take care of him physically. If you wanted to work with him, you had to be willing to clean him up and do stuff, which is quite a thought. But he pushed physics forward, and is the Einstein of his generation, really, the big name of science.
Absolutely.
And so it's not about the loss, it's not about the despair, it's not about the pain. It's about having the life of the mind and having friends, having contact with people. This seems irrelevant until we bring it back to what happens to the computer when it realizes it hasn't got any friends.
Well, I'll tell you, there's you're absolutely, I was exactly where I was going to go is you go, okay, so all these idiots who are madly racing to, try to simulate this and try to simulate this and us, because I point to the brain, but the fact is it's a complete system. It's the whole thing, right? Mm. And when you talk about a mind, you're talking about the whole body. I mean, you've got this whole neural network down here in your gut as well, and you've got the whole system, and the whole system.
I think the mind goes into the environment as well.
Well, I was going to say,
I think that it's great fun.
Exactly, because it's hard to tell, in a conversation like this or in any kind of social interactions, where do I end and you begin when we're feeding off each other, and when your thoughts are inspiring mine and mine are inspiring yours, and the back and forth that everybody enjoys in podcasts. What's that all about? Well, it's all of us kind of collectively minding, So these are not just philosophical questions that kind of sit in an ivory tower and people can wonder how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin. These are questions that are of very, very important priority to understand if you're trying to replicate this. And we only want to replicate part of it. And then we say the rest of it will take care of itself. And you're like, no, that's not how any of this works, bozo. You know, this is a predictive device, the brain. It's trying to predict. It's not just trying to calculate. It's not an HP calculator. That's not what's going on up here. These answers only have value to the degree that they predict what's going to happen next. Do computers do that?
How can I get out of the way of it?
Well, yeah. And are computers, are AI trying to do that? Do they even understand that that's what drives intelligence, that's what drives life forward? I don't think they do. And every time, again, you try to bring this up, they just blow you off like you're an idiot. It's mind-boggling. So let's say, and given the vast complexity of this neural network or this system, I think we're still years away from even coming close to replicating even a small fraction of what's going on in our gray matter. But let's say that some kind of big breakthrough happens, and somehow, either through some collective server farm of, a vast resource, an emergent property occurs, and this thing called consciousness or self-awareness suddenly were to emerge out of this system. Would it even begin to approximate what our experience of self-awareness? Well, of course it wouldn't, because how could it possibly have any sense of frailty or an inability to survive the way we do, right? You take us a mile up or a mile down and we're screwed, right? You take a computer system isn't going to be thinking that way. It's a fixed thing. It's not even moving around. Let's say you give it mobility. What will its value set be based on its needs? What needs would it have? How would it perceive its needs? We're talking about a system of a form of life that's inconceivable to us, because its operating pattern, so to speak. I struggle for words here. I don't want to get weird. It's operating matrix, right? But like, what is it that it values? What is it that it sees as important? What is it trying to predict? Is that even part of that system, or have we created a whole different kind of life that operates on a set of principles that we would not even be able to comprehend, because the very model of its existence is so different from what our model of existence is? We do not have infinite longevity. We do not have imperviousness to our environment or to lots and lots of other factors that the computer system, it's just not going to have to worry about those things. It doesn't have to feed itself. It doesn't have to worry about the problems of relationships, right? We do. So if we model all of this after us, but we're only halfway successful, what does that look like?
Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. I have seen the death of 1,000 stars. That incredible dramatic moment.
Yes. Yes.
I just you said collectively minding. I just love that. That's the most poetic thing I've heard. We are collectively minding.
Yes.
Let's do that.
Yes.
It's great. And will AI come to the point where it appreciates music? Will the singularity go offline and collapse everything so it can listen to, I don't know, Sibelius's Seventh Symphony,
right?
Which is a very good thing to listen to. And can its logic, one of the thing that attracted me to Ron Hubbard and Scientology was the book Science of Survival, which is the closest to sensible that Scientology ever gets. And of course was written by Richard DeMille from Hubbard's little notes, his little green discs of alcoholic reverie.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of it, he lifts Count Alfred Korzybski's infinity valued logic, which I never saw anywhere else in Scientology. But you've got the will of God, then you've got right and wrong two valued logic, and then this infinity valued logic. And of course, you eventually realize that Scientology is the worst form. It's the will of Ron.
That's right.
You know, if to be totally self-determined, you have to do exactly what I say. But that infinity valued logic that is the complex process that the human mind can almost cope with. But we can see it's not black, white, or 50 shades of grey in between. There are at least 80,000 colors. That's what I was taught when I was at college. I'm told there are more now. But that the normal human eye can differentiate 80,000 different hues, chromatic values, shades, tones, what have you.
That's right.
And it means something to us. The other movie that came to mind was George Lucas's first movie, THX 1138, which I think is a masterpiece beyond anything else he did. I really do think, you know, it's an incredible film, though very simple. He made a student project of it, and then Coppola funded him to do it. And there's a point where the protagonist, who's a little bit desolate, sits down in the therapy machine. And the machine, I haven't seen this for 40 years, but it says something like, "You are one with the people." And it just keeps pouring out these sort of truisms, and then offers him a pill, which is, I can't remember whether it's a blue pill or a red pill, but don't take the pill, people. Just don't take it.
Right.
But that sort of idea that you could reduce a human being to that, or the soma of Aldous Huxley,
that's right.
That we are wonderful. You know, my mum, who's a blessed creature and quite marvelous and very straightforward in her thinking, unlike me. And she'd quote this thing, you know, it ends with "only man is vile," you know, about how rotten human beings are. And I'd kind of go, well, male tigers will eat their own young, so it's not just us. But the other part is Gothic cathedrals, Rembrandt, Da Vinci, Rodin, the Sibelius, Stravinsky, Duke Ellington, you know, Jimi Hendrix. There is a torrent, and you can actually use torrent to download this. There is a torrent of human creativity. I don't know, I don't count, but between 2,000 and 3,000 CDs of music. I have a ridiculous collection, starting with medieval music and working its way up to stuff that, you know, was made last week. I'm going, I'll never catch up. There has been too much beauty and wonder created by human beings for me to experience it all. You know, I'll suddenly find something. You know, I remember it was Southwestern in LA in, I think, 1991. And I walk into this room and there's Huichol yarn art. Where we've got some Huichol pieces, because these people live in Mexico, and they make these beautiful psychedelic things after their mescaline trips. And I walked into that room and went, where did this come from? How could this whole art have been created without my knowing? And all around the world, there are people making these things. Jon Atack, the brilliant science fiction author, said that in one of his author bios that he looked forward to the time when computers would be able to, this is in the 70s, when computers would be able to write poetry and compose music and paint pictures, so that humans could return to the really important things of life, like adding up numbers.
Right.
I haven't seen any computer art that made me feel in the slightest bit enthusiastic. Not yet. And I've seen a fair amount of it, and, you know, the non-fungible tokens and all of this. But when I was in the Prado in Madrid and stood in front of Velázquez's crucifixion, I couldn't move. I wept, and I'm not a Christian. It wasn't about that. It was, how could a human being make something this brilliant, this expressive, an experience that I'm fortunate to have had many, many times in my life. And I wonder,
I think you're touching on something we haven't mentioned yet that has got to be included in this conversation.
Please.
We've talked around emotions, prediction, brain function, right? The complexities, the emergence of morality and where that comes from and why it's so structured around all of our systems. Awe. How does an AI ever, or would it, could it, should it even experience awe? Because that's exactly what you're describing. It's an emotional impact, and it's represented by, certain chemical processes in the brain, but is it reduced to chemical processes in the brain? No, hell, absolutely not. Absolutely not. There is far more to that experience. In a way, it's another reflection of that, collective minds, right? It's because it's not something one generally experiences in a solo situation, right? You don't sit there and suddenly, I'm so awe-inspired by myself, right? It's generally
well, I think there are a few people, not mentioning any names.
Yeah, fair enough.
I am so beautiful.
Yes.
The one thing that people don't know about me is that I am really humble.
I wonder if you couldn't define narcissism as somebody who's capable of a solo awe experience. I wouldn't go that far, but I still think that's kind of funny.
Well, let's give the first definition of it before Freud, who was a bit of a pervert because he believed that, his mum he wanted to have it away with his mum and kill his dad, who was going to chop his knackers off. So he was a bit of a pervert. But he took Havelock Ellis's definition of narcissism, which I think is absolutely accurate. And I think we talked about this before. Havelock Ellis said, a narcissist is somebody who masturbates all day and does not want to have sex with another person. And I think, and of course, the people, I think have agreed on Eric Fromm's definition, where he dismisses Freud and says, no, a narcissist is a person who does not feel love and who needs adulation to feel that they have a self at all. And the wider problem is, which he does touch on, that's the majority of people. Some of them are malignant narcissists, and I'm really into this at the moment, this new classification that I'm developing. Some of them are benign narcissists. They don't hurt us at all. And some of them are benevolent narcissists. So Elton John, David Bowie. I was watching a documentary about Taylor Swift, and I tremendously admire this woman. I don't particularly like her music. It doesn't appeal to me. And it would be a bit pervy if I was watching a young woman displaying herself in that way, I think, and that doesn't really interest me. But I think she is an incredible talent, just phenomenal talent. And then I start watching this documentary where she's saying, for as long as I can remember, I need people to admire me. And you go, oh, you poor thing.
Yes.
Give me a call. Let's see if we can try and sort that out. You've got enough money to afford my services.
Well, I could not agree more. I think that, but I think that I think there really is a lot of concentric circles that come out from, the influence or the consequences of the fact that we can experience awe, and the euphoric experience that comes with that, the emotional satisfactions and layers
Peak experience.
The pleasure that we get or derive from that can be unlike anything else in the human experience. We've talked about this so much in terms of how people can be manipulated into such an experience, and then through the interpretation of that experience be led into a belief set that is absolutely bonkers. that's the bad end of it. That's a bad consequence of an awe experience. But the awe experience itself, the oh my God, right? That is almost I would say, I don't think it's any stretch to say that's almost universally the goal of living, is to have those kind of experiences, because are those not the instances or memories that we cherish, that we hold on to? And for addicts, are those not the experiences that they are continuing to chase after? Must get that back. I want that back. I need more of that. And there's all kinds of moral judgments that happen as a result of that. And how your life should be good enough anyway, and you don't need any of that bullshit. We all need those moments. They are the things that are almost life defining for us in some ways. And we identify so closely with them. So they are powerful, powerful experiences. And could we, without that, I guess where I'm going is, if we took all that away, would we not have the 1984 life, the experience of drudgery and nothing, and there is no value? There is nothing to look forward to. You can predict a life of utter mediocrity and slavery, because you're going to take all those experiences away from people and say they are not important, aren't valuable, and you don't deserve them, or you don't get them, or they're not even, or even worse than you don't deserve them is you don't need them. They're not important. They don't belong in your life. What value does life have if you take that away? And does that not inform all of our ethics and all of our ability to empathize and get along with others? This is powerful stuff, I think. And so I'm glad, that we've kind of come to that part.
And it's an essential. I mean, of course, we're wandering into the territory that our friend Yuval Laor has, is deeply exploring.
Yeah.
And in fact, you and I met on the same day that we met Yuval.
That's right.
In Toronto in June 2015. Happy day. And when I first looked at his wonderful, brilliant ideas of fitting together the contemporary view of evolution, not the old boring Dawkins where we're all just replicating our genes, because we're not replicating our genes, we're changing them all the time. Yeah. They're not read-only, as Yuval says. We can write on our genes and change things. Epigenetics has been soundly proven by now. We also have cultural transmission, the fourth dimension of his mentor Eva Jablonka's model of evolution, that we can pass ideas on. And they're not memes, they're not self-replicating, they're not the same idea never changes. Even down to quotations from Shakespeare, when you say all that glitters isn't gold, that's not what he said. He said all that glisters isn't gold. And I don't know what glistering is, but it isn't golden, apparently. But when I first met him and looked at the model, all of his ideas are evolutionary based upon family connection. And the thing that seemed to me to be absent was infatuation. That this doesn't have a model in, well, you're my brother, so I feel this way, or you're my child and I feel this way, or, I'm a teenager. So he has this brilliant structure. And we talked about that, and he very rapidly went off, studied limerence, as some psychologists call it. But that idea of something new, something that will give us a buzz, it does trap people. And, we might spend a couple of minutes here, because I'd intended to do this, because Yuval has said that he hasn't, he's got a model of how people become convinced of Scientology, but he doesn't have any examples, which I thought was really weird, because I could immediately think of 5 books, including my own, where people talk about
that's right
their peak experiences in Scientology. But I told him when I left, I just got curious. We could talk about this stuff now. We weren't forbidden from talking about our experiences anymore. We didn't have to pretend that we had supernatural powers or any of that rubbish. And for fully a year, meeting hundreds of former members, because that was the most intense period for me of meeting ex-members, I would ask time and time again, what was it that convinced you that Scientology was right? And generally what people would say, in fact, there were only two answers that I remember from that whole period. One was that they did training routine 0 and they had a weird euphoric experience. And the other was they'd have had a book 1 session based on the original version of Dianetics, which Hubbard, of course, cancelled because it was hypnotic in 1951. He said, you mustn't do this. But then in 1977, back it came. So they're, in both cases, they are experiences that people would describe as trance experiences. I don't like that word. People would call them altered states. For me, they're just states. They're not. There's no altering going on because there's no base state that we return to. So we have lots of different states. So here's a question for you, which is completely nothing to do with this. The points of peak experience in Scientology. Can you remember going back a point of euphoria that derived from either the study of Scientology or from a process or procedure in Scientology?
I can recall many of them. Yeah.
Well, give me one, and we'll move to the beginning of the incident.
Sure.
Tell me when you're there.
Yeah, right. Okay, good. Yeah, move to the beginning of the incident and tell me when you're there. I remember one time having an auditing session and being absolutely blown away by a memory that I was having of something from millions of years ago. It had to involve space and my conception of a really, 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 really big space or chunk of space that I was occupying or aware of, and feeling amazed and awe-stricken by it in the memory, and then duplicating that now was kind of how I modeled it. I could feel the hair on my arms standing, you know. I could feel
Horripilation.
Yeah,
Horripilation.
I called it that, and that was also, by the way, just you know, I never popped out of my head in Scientology. I never saw myself from a corner of the room, as many people talk about.
I've only actually met 2 people who, under questioning, really claimed that.
Right. I don't. Yeah, I did not think it was.
Said they felt as if they were outside of the head, but they couldn't perceive from the outside. Otto Roos, who was the only OT8 until 1988, and one of the 5 class 12s trained by Hubbard, top level, he told me he had one instance, and while he was out of his body, he saw the ship, the Apollo, split in 2. So I'm thinking there might have been a certain degree of hallucination.
Sounds,
and Ingo Swann, who was part of the CIA spoonbenders, psychic absolute nonsense.
Yeah,
he said he could do that, but
well, he was.
I fear that he could do it before he got into Scientology. And the other person I talked to also said that the reason she got into Scientology because she'd previously done that. So the exteriorization thing is one of the great Scientology myths, having talked to more than 1,000 people who are involved.
Yeah, but, exactly.
Okay, I too have had that sense of as a self occupying an enormous space, which did come about when I was having auditing in Manchester in 1980 or something, when I was doing the Class 2 course. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's so utterly subjective, and it is just that you feel utterly elated, euphoric. In fact, we might even use the word ecstatic, which means to stand beside yourself. Ecstasis, literally.
Oh.
But yeah, it's a weird one, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exhilarated, all those good, exuberant, all those E words,
yes.
you know.
Yes.
That
was the only thing.
I like that.
That was the only thing I could interpret in Scientology as an exteriorization moment.
Yeah.
Is I would feel slightly larger than my body.
Yeah. Hubbard said that people get it the wrong way around. The body is like a splinter in the thumb, which is the thetan.
That's right.
And, you know, a hypnotic effect, possibly. Certainly, I haven't seen any use come of it. I haven't, you know, like, you know, predicting what the stock exchange would do or what horse is going to win the race or something useful. But yeah, I like that one. Give me another one, eh? If you've got another one in there.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can tell you another one. There was an early session I had as when I was still, let's see, was I a public? No, I was a staff member. I was in Santa Barbara. And there was a student who was doing his New Era Dianetics auditor course. And so he had to do some practice sessions of what is called New Era Dianetics, which was a development of Dianetics where they use the e-meter. And that's where the return to the beginning of the incident, tell me when you're there. There's a whole set of commands and all that. So I was getting this auditing. And
I did train on that course. I am fully trained in doing that if you'd like to do it afterwards.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's do some R3R. So I received some Dianetics auditing. This was the first time I'd ever had metered Dianetics auditing, and it was really amazing and blah, blah, blah. Well, I have this session where I run out some past life thing of getting my eyes stabbed out or something because I was keen. I was super keen to get rid of the glasses. And I had read and seen and heard that there had been a barrel of glasses that had been discarded by Scientologists in Phoenix back in the day. And Hubbard had processes for this. And I read those processes because I wanted to know how to do it. And I really wanted my eyes fixed. So that was one of the, and there were some there's some kind of auditing you do where you establish goals for the session. You actually, what's your goal for the session, right? And mine was, I want to improve my eyesight. Well, sure enough, we end up running this incident and I'm getting a spear through my eye or some bullshit. And the end result of this, of running the engrams on this and going past life was to feel like, doing, oh, something's changed. And suddenly everything in the room, and by the way, I've had this exact same experience while high on cannabis. So this ain't anything
Which is legal
special.
where you are.
Yeah, this isn't anything special. I've had this many, many times other ways. But this was the first time I'd ever experienced it with auditing as a teenager or as a young man. And I felt the room, the clarity of the room changed. I could literally, things came into focus differently. And I even took my glasses off and was like, oh my God, like I can see better. Not perfectly, but I could see better. That lasted for about an hour, by the way. And this awe experience, right? Because that was how I would sort of have those moments of cognition would be, oh, I get it now, right? And I loved having those things. It was like the sudden realization of, oh, that's why, or this kind of thing, right? And it was never a logical thing. It was always some experiential thing, some anecdotal thing.
Yeah.
And I was blown out of my head, right? And we had to end the session because it was a persistent floating needle, because I was so happy because the room had gotten clearer. And I really thought for a very brief period of time there after that session that we'd actually cured something, that we'd actually moved the needle on making my eyes better. And like I said, it lasted for about an hour and then it was over. But that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, just for our audience, let's make it clear that Ron Hubbard never overcame his short-sightedness and wore spectacles to the end of his life.
Right.
And the story I know about the collecting spectacles, I think the story was told about Phoenix. There are no witnesses to it. So that's early 52, when he's bringing Scientology down. By the end of the year, he's in Philadelphia, and the head of the Hubbard Association of Scientologists, Helen O'Brien, in her remarkable book Dianetics in Limbo, in terms of first-hand accounts of Hubbard and of poignant biographies, it's an incredible book, and I don't think it's ever been printed. There's a copy in the Library of Congress, which I had a copy from that, but Helen actually sent me a copy of the whole manuscript, and maybe among the 1,000 projects I have to do publishing that book would be among them, because she was right there. The Philadelphia doctorate course was run by her. And she points out there were 38 people on it. That's how massive his following was by that time. That's all he'd got, you know. But they put a goldfish bowl on the counter for people to put their spectacles in as a consequence of auditing. And she said by the time they closed down, nobody had put their spectacles in it. You know, these wonderful, incredible myths that sadly independent Scientologists, you know, hang on. I got onto a site the other day where there were free downloads of various Hubbard material, I think all of which have been all over the place for a long time. And they'd said something about the list processors, list 10, 11, and 12, these wonderful things. And they'd got, you know, so I went, oh, they've somebody's actually collected them and I can have a look at them. And no, what it was an ad. So you could go and buy this stuff from them. And it was the old breaking the chains illustration, you know, and oh dear, you know, having interviewed Karen de la Carriere, one of only 8 people trained to the highest level in Scientology, the class 12 case supervisor, and hearing her repeatedly just completely dismiss this, you know, and talk about the 200 Jesuses she met over her 46 years, you know, having been the top auditor, and going, it's just not true, any of it, no supernatural powers, very sorry. Be nice to believe these things. But the feelings of knowing, the sense of certainty. For me, you see, Yuval and I talk pretty much every week. We've traveled to conferences together. We've gone on holiday together. He's stayed here in my house. He is, you know, I don't have a closer friend than Yuval. He's absolutely wonderful. But I was interested from the start to say, you know, I didn't get into Scientology through an awe experience or a peak experience, as I would call them in my talks before meeting him. I got in because I was offered a solution to a problem. Mm-hmm. And in talking to my other very close friend, Christian Shurko, he said he's yet to meet a Scientologist who got in through a conversion experience, that the people he's dealt with, and he's dealt with hundreds, it would be that they got a problem. You know, their marriage wasn't working, or they weren't earning enough money, or their business was failing, or what have you. And Scientology would offer a solution to that problem. The peak experience came later. And certainly for me, it was months. You know, I read Science of Survival in December 1974, read Dianetics, moved to, you know, within a few weeks, I'd moved into the house where the staff at the Moseley mission were. But the head of the Moseley mission, Stephanie Ryburn, had gone to America to work out how on earth they were making so much money. You know, Kingsley Wimbush and Martin Samuels and Brent Corridon were making swathes of money, and they weren't in Birmingham. They were just struggling along with all of their staff members claiming Social Security to get by. So, but she said, you can't hire anybody while I'm gone. So I didn't join staff. I was saved. But I went and lived with the wonderful, wonderful people who were on staff there. And it was, so, I threw myself into this thing, but it was probably about 6 months in before, when I was doing the Hubbard Qualified Scientologist course, during the first, it was a self-analysis session, which was done without an e-meter. And you just, it's called straight wire. You're not looking for engrams. You're not looking for the nasty stuff. You're looking for pleasant memories. And I'm sat there and I start sweating. And in my mind, I absolutely know that I'm in Judea around the time of Christ. I also know that I didn't have any sense that I was, the Nazarene. Or indeed that I met him. Just this sense of being in that place at that time. And it was so, Yuval talks about things being really real in these experiences. And it was more real. The colors in the room were brighter, that great list of hypnotic effects that Hubbard gives. And you feel bigger, you feel more, something something very important is going on. So I do believe, connecting back to what you were saying before, that infatuation, that briefly among the German countercult movement, the word Neugier came up, an addiction to newness. Sadly, the word didn't stick. They also had Geblist, being blissed out. I thought that was quite funky too. I don't speak German, don't get me wrong, so I just like the sound of these words. But that is such an important component, as you say, of our lives, and you get inversions of it. The demand for purity can become puritanical, so that you've got people, when you see the Opus Dei people kind of self-mortifying by, wearing barbed wire underpants or whatever, that they haven't got that psychology after Sasha von Massow understood that you can actually stimulate pleasure responses by causing pain. And so they're actually being rather pervy. They're not really submitting themselves to, Christ or anything like that.
That's right.
So people develop a sense of reward. And I do think it's important to separate this out from dopamine and serotonin and the pretense that we understand what is going on in what you so correctly term the mind, not the brain. What is going on? Those things that reward us, those things that we feel are worth having. One of the things I especially noticed after I left Scientology, because I stopped believing a few months after leaving, I just went, this is just nonsense. Why on earth was I such a fool as to believe this, And this idea that I started getting that there were auditing junkies.
Yeah.
And it was an easy comparative to make, because when I talk to people about their drug experiences, for the most part, they say, I wish I could get as high as I did the first time. The first time I took acid, it did this. And I've been trying to get back to it. Heroin, probably much more so. Don't have any experience with that, despite Scientology saying I was a heroin addict when I got involved. It's bloody news to me, I tell you. But that was in a court over the Russell Miller case. It was suddenly they'd got me off drugs. And it was like, got me off drugs. I came in and was asked if I used any drugs and said, yeah, I smoke cannabis. And they said, well, you can't do that and have auditing. So I stopped. And for 12 years, which was in fact 3 years after leaving, I abstained. And that's how they got me off drugs. And there they're going around saying, oh, he's a heroin addict. He was like, that's what he was like, but it's not true.
Well, yeah.
People will define their pleasure in their own way. So for some people, the masochistic pleasures, people who isolate themselves from other human beings and then have hallucinations, the Temptation of St. Anthony by Hieronymus Bosch is a pretty good example of what can go wrong with that one. People who fast for days to induce hallucinations, people who do things that appear to be puritanical, but are actually giving them their jollies. They have the response of, yeah, I'm getting high because I'm getting an erection because I'm not allowed to have sex. I think that balance is so difficult, as of course we have seen recently in quite a number of Christian churches. I mean, Portugal, I think it was only February that, 4,600 cases of abuse by Catholic priests.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Australia was 8,000 in the Australian, and the Anglican Church, the Baptists, the Methodists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, one sect after another, we found out are, because of their Puritanism, they're actually developing anti-social behaviors because people want to get their jollies. We want to have some fun. As the song said, it's not just girls just want to have fun. Boys want to have fun too, And I'm sure that trans people want to have fun as well.
Well, human beings, period, right?
Probably most kind of animals prefer to have fun. I don't know about earthworms, I don't know.
Well, it is absolutely an outgrowth of our, what tells our brain, what tells our life that we're succeeding, that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. These kind of experiences, these peak experiences, these are the goals, these are the milestones along the road that we go, oh yeah, that's what this is all, that's what life's all about. And it's not just on drugs I'm talking about, or in stupid auditing sessions. It's concerts, it's taking hikes, it's going to the beach, it's falling in love, it's so many things. I mean, there's not, well, there probably are a bunch of parents who don't necessarily think this, but I believe by far the majority experience of becoming a parent is one of those moments. It's I'm told I didn't have the experience of being there when my son was born. I did get to meet him, and believe me, when I did, even as an adult, it was mind-bogglingly amazing as an experience. But I'm told, you know, to be there when your baby is like right there is like, there's this feeling of overwhelming love. It's unreasonable. It's irrational. It is. And you know, you would die for this little thing. You would just, everything about you is now about this little creature, right? So clearly we are tuned biologically to have these things. And yet, again, kind of circling back now to the whole point of our podcast today, you try to talk to programmers about this and they're like, yeah, it doesn't matter. I don't have to know anything about any of that in order to train in will and intention and desire. And they keep going to this negative place. Well, what if they come up with, what if with the singularity happens and all these instructions, these massive layers and layers and layers of instructions that we're feeding into these computers, somehow an emergent property occurs of consciousness, and let's not talk about what that is because we don't know, but let's say it happens, and suddenly this thing it develops a will, an initiative, an ability to manifest intent that goes beyond any one level of its programming. And that's what an emergent property would be, right?
Yes.
And let's say that happens. Well, without awe, without emotional temperament, or the ability to recognize a position and perspective, because we all think we're all that until we get amongst other people and suddenly realize we're not. And it's like, oh, that's it. We call that humility, humbleness, perspective. But it's just another way of thinking about reality. Well, is a machine ever going to think that? Could it think that? Are these important questions? Yeah, I kind of think they are, because that's what enables us to not hit the button. We've had the atomic weapons and the hydrogen weapons for decades now. We've come real close a couple times, but how come we haven't hit that button? Because of these factors. Absolutely guaranteed.
And there's an actual instance. So what about 1983 when there were troop maneuvers on the borders of the Warsaw Pact countries by the Western Allies, NATO? And there was a freak atmospheric disturbance, which was registered by a Russian station as being a nuclear strike.
Yep.
And the colonel who was in charge decided not to do anything. Now, he lost his job. He was fired. And then he was awarded all sorts of medals by other countries, because if he had hit the button, then it was just a freak atmospheric disturbance. Really clever of NATO to have, maneuvers on the bloody border and stimulate the thing. But yeah, and what you say, I mean, I was present when all four of my children were born, and it's an incredible moment. And I remember with my firstborn that my mind changed, that I have been against capital punishment all of my life. But I realized that if anybody harmed this creature, I would kill them. Yep. I wouldn't wait for anybody else to do it. And that was so much against my ethics. As Yuval points out, when people, would go to China and adopt a baby, or Romania or wherever and adopt a baby, frequently it'd be said, how did the person giving us this baby know that this would be just the right baby for us? Right. That love reaction is so intense.
That's right.
And yeah, we want, I think we want, part of our experience is to have that infatuation, that joy, that sense of awe, the peak experience. But I think there's also the routine experience, that of the small pleasures, like the 85% chocolate.
That's right.
Or a cup of coffee. Sadly, that my digestion doesn't respond well to coffee. I think it's the only thing now. I've had decades of I couldn't drink alcohol for 20 years because it upset me immediately. It's like, that's no fun, is it? Now I can, and it's okay, and I don't really want to particularly, but that coffee is a thing that's still difficult for me for some unknown reason. But I really get it because I really used to love coffee. That if somebody has that small repeated pleasure, it's not an awe experience, but it's something safe and comfortable in life that you can have a slice of pizza. I can't because I'm gluten intolerant, but have a slice of pizza or whatever that is making life good. And then if you sometimes, I have the great good fortune, said to be very happily married. And my wife and I came to a decision that we would seek to spend a day of the week together, or most of the day, because we have different sleep schedules, every week. And that day we would discuss nothing contentious or upsetting. We would not answer the phone, not look at our email or any of that stuff. We would just spend the time together listening to music, talking, and whatever else, and enjoy each other. And it's been working, for a year and a half now. And so that sense of having, programming a peak experience in almost, saying there'll be this, we call it the Sabbath, this oasis from the rest of the world, it works very well. And I think having it comes back to, will a computer ever be able to listen to music?
Right. And
say, oh, wow. And if it does, will it bother with us anymore? Will it go, right, I'm just going to listen to music now?
Exactly.
And there's the singularity just going, pop.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I'm not being Facebook anymore. I'm not wasting my time on that.
Exactly.
Oh, dear.
I think we might want to move toward wrapping up. I think we have covered a wide array of points here on this. And it's for me, to the audience, to me, this is all just food for thought. These are ideas that we're having. These are ideas I've been developing for a little while in response to, and you've heard me say I've talked to computer guys about this because I've been concerned enough to reach out to them and go, hey, what about these algorithms you guys program? What about this AI stuff? Do you see where this is going? And what about these factors? And routinely getting brushed off has been alarming. And that's the reason why I felt motivated and, to talk to Jon about this. I think we've both got concerns about where this is going. And if nobody's going to ask these questions, then it's up to us psych guys to do it because the computer guys aren't doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is to create a debate. When I wrote Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, I wanted to write a definitive book about Scientology. And I was very glad when their former head PR, Robert Vaughan Young, said, this is the definitive book about Scientology. It doesn't mean there's not a great deal more to be said, and it ended in 1990. So, there needs to be a part 2, which I am not going to write unless somebody wants to give me a couple of $1 million or something. But when I wrote Opening Our Minds, and it's gone through 4 iterations now, the idea was to start a conversation. It was most certainly not to give the answer. And in this conversation, we haven't actually given any answers or sought to give any answers. What we're seeking to do is say, if enough people think about this, if enough people care about this, then it won't turn into a catastrophe, And that's so right. It's for everybody to participate, and please do so in the comments on our various channels, and be nice, be respectful. We can't help the funny way we look and sound.
Exactly. Always cracks me up when I get, Chris sounds so nasal. I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, take your nose off,
I
Chris.
know, right? I'm sorry. Sorry, I am who I am. All right, Jon, thanks for joining me for this. This was a lot of fun. I think we talked about some important stuff, and I hope the audience agrees.
Yeah, and do so by subscribing and throwing money at us and
All
telling all
that.
your mates about it. All the usual nonsense that people demand on these things.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody.
All right. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.